Oh, what's up, GameLeapers? The Jizz back at it, and patch 11.10 is now live. So who's pumped? Doublelift, are you pumped? And in this video, we are going to be revealing the 11 worst champions for this patch. Now, I'm not saying you can't win on these picks, guys. All I'm saying is you are making the rift more difficult than it needs to be when you lock these champions in. So to know who to steer clear of for the next 2 weeks, strap yourselves in and engage that dormant organ for the next 10 or so minutes. And as we get into it, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you smash that sub button and the notification bell, like who doesn't want a daily dose of jizz? And also make sure to head on over to our Red Hot GameLeap website. Thousands of our subs, guys, get exclusive access to the best and freshest content on the World Wide Web when it comes to League, that is. So get signed up, links as always in the description and comment section. Alright, let's get into it, guys, and starting off this countdown is a champion who has been on most of these lists, if not every single list this season, and this is a top laner who has been having a rough time of it in solo queue once again. Now in pro play, GP, Gangplank, is picked a lot, right? He brings a lot of utility to the team, he's a very good weak side top laner. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. But in solo queue, when you're playing with random teammates, maybe in gold, plat, diamond, even in high elo, GP is struggling and generally has a 45 to 46% win rate. So even the best GPs are struggling to make him work in that solo queue environment. Now why is that? Whether you decide to go the crit build with Essence Reaver and Mortal Shield Bow or the more bruiser setup with Triforce in there, the truth is, guys, that GP needs his teammates to do work. And guess what? Well, I'm sure you all know by now, most of the time this isn't going to happen. Your teammates don't know how to play their champions, they're probably off rolling, and when the late game does come around, when you're really strong, most of the time it's just going to be wasted because your teammates don't know how to play with you. GP is also one of the highest skill cap champions in the game, guys. There's a big difference between someone who's really good at GP and someone who has just started out playing him. Now, thankfully, this patch, Darius got nerfed a little bit, so that matchup is a little less scary, especially when he gets this Stride Breaker. And Abyssal Mask is buffed, so you're going to see more tanks who typically aren't that scary for GP. It's like a free scaling lane. So in terms of the actual patch changes, it's not really that bad for GP. It's just the actual state and disposition he's in, which is still a pretty bad one. Now ahead of GP, guys, coming in at number 10 is a champion, a mid laner, a mage who has been on, I think, one of these lists so far this season, and this is Syndra. And this patch, guys, there's actually a change coming in, a systemic change, if you will, that's decreasing her power. So those of you who complain on Reddit about Syndra one-shotting you, well, you're going to see less of them, so you guys should be happy. But yes, Phase Rush, the rune, the keystone that most Syndra players go, if not every Syndra player, is getting nerfed. So the cooldown is actually shorter in the later game, okay, but in the early laning phase, guys, it's actually doubled. So when you're laning at level 1, level 2, level 3, the first few waves and in that early part of the game, you are going to be struggling just because you're not going to be getting access to Phase Rush. So you're more accessible, more vulnerable to ganks, more vulnerable to assassins jumping onto you with gap closes. It's a little scary in the mid lane. And the movement speed you get from the rush, guys, is also down for ranged champions in the early game. And these mages, guys, like Syndra, and we'll get into a couple more maybe, typically have to rely on it. So the fact it's on a higher cooldown and you're getting less movement speed, yeah, you're going to be dying more in the early game. And these champions as well are actually weak in the early game too. They're some of the best scalers in the game, but you can punish them early on. Now, Phase Rush, this change alone, guys, can't make Syndra bad, so what else is it? Well, most of the time, if not all the time, you can get the early game push in your lane because you are a very strong level 1, level 2 champion. You've got great harass, wave control, and all that. But the problem is, guys, you are so easy to kill. Ever since Ryan nerfed Seeker's Arm Guard a few patches ago, mages have been struggling, especially against AD assassins and AD champions in general. And unless you have a stopwatch in your kit or a Zonya's, you are going to die in pretty much every single team fight. So yeah, sure, damage might still be there, but there's no point in having that damage if you can't use it because you're dead. So Syndra comes in at number 10, guys. Now ahead of Syndra is another champion who might deal decent amount of damage, but during the laning phase, guys, during team fights as well as the game opens up, you are still going to die quite a lot as Ezreal. And it pains me to say Ezreal because I think he's been on most of these champions lists, so Bright, please can you buff some of these champions so I don't have to talk about them every single 2 weeks. And even though for Ezreal, guys, like Essence Reaver might be a nice kind of early game spike, you know, Mirror Mana's shock damage has been buffed this season for AD spellcasters like Ezreal. Duskblade works really well because of the damage, the ability haste. Even Cerilda's Grudge got buffed this season, which is 200 less gold now. But still, overall, Ezreal is just so killable. Like, there's no amount of haste or damage, which means nothing on the defensive end of things, that's going to save you. Now, with the increase in play of Lulu and other spellcasting supports like Karma and Sona and all them, maybe you have a chance of surviving more in teamfights because they might actually peel you. But for the most part, guys, no one is going to peel you. No one actually realizes you exist. So getting to that 2-3 item spike is still super difficult, and honestly, it's probably not even worth. Now ahead of Ezreal, guys, coming in at number 8 is a champion who I haven't really talked about this season, but to be honest, I need to. Because this champion's design, honestly, in my opinion, is pretty sick. But for Shyvana, guys, this patch, these last few patches, in fact, have been really tough. Whether you're going AP Shyvana, who actually takes a bit of time to scale, even the Nash's Toothbrush isn't really that much of a spike, and there are other AP champions in the game, junglers that is, who just do your job better. They do more damage, they're better at clearing, and if you're against a strong early game team comp, it's actually kind of hard to survive in the jungle. You're going to get pressure and you don't have time to scale into that late game dragon beast. And if you decide to go AD, well, AD Shiv really isn't that good anymore. Riot took out some of that power, but if you even think about the items, Frozen Mallet is no longer in the game, which used to be a great item on AD Shiv. Hawk has been nerfed this season as well, and in terms of bruises, there are just better options. And all of this has resulted in, guys, Shyvana having a 43% win rate in higher elo. So yes, you still might be able to make her work in bronze, and you can make really anything work in bronze, but the fact is, there are better champions out there. Now, ahead of Shyvana, guys, coming in at number 7 is the second AD carry we have to talk about, and this is Zarya, who has been in this countdown forever. And it really pains me to say it because I actually like this champion and the ADC role in general. Like, it's been so bad ever since Crit got changed in the preseason, and there really hasn't been much love from Riot in the ADC department. Like, okay, Kai'Sa and Jhin have been strong, and now Jinx is strong, but what about these other marksmen? These guys have been down in the dumps for ages now, and one of the reasons Zarya is so bad is because it takes time, a bit like Ezreal, to really get to your power spikes. Yes, the cooldown buff and the mana cost buff to your E and 11-1 was a big help, but let's be real. How useful is it really? How useful is it when you've got a support who doesn't know what day it is? How useful is it when your rank 1 ultimate is on a 3-minute cooldown and that's your only form of peel? How useful is it when Essence Reaver is nerfed? How useful is it when it takes 25-30 minutes for you to come online? So again, Zarya is one of these champions, guys, who might work in pro play and in higher elos a little bit more than she does in lower elos, but even still, solo queue for the most part is a very similar environment. It doesn't matter what echelon you're playing in, and Zarya unfortunately remains as one of the worst champions in the game. Now we've got another staple worst champion pick coming in next, guys, and coming in at number 6 is Azir, who thankfully is the only mage on this list who doesn't go phase rush, so he's unaffected by that nerf. But is there anything actually good for Azir at the moment? Alright, so maybe Riot reduced your Q's cooldown by a second earlier in the season, but your W now does less damage in your auto attacks in the early game, and you obviously start with this ability, so your laning phase isn't as strong. The Seeker's Arm Guard nerf in the same patch means that against Talon, against Zed, against Kiana, these are champions you see a lot, you're going to die when they hit level 6. It takes so long for you to come online as well, right? Like Zarya, like Ezreal, you're in the same boat. It takes 2 to 3 items for you to really, come online and 1v9, because by the time you can actually start carrying, the game's already over. And I've said this a million times before, but the new Nash's Tooth, which no longer gives you cooldown, yes, okay, it might give you a nice chunk of AP and attack speed, but still, the lack of cooldown is a real hit, and your mythic item spike, whether you go Ludens or Liandry's, compare this to a Zed with a Prowler's Claw, or an Annie with a Rocket Belt, or a Sylas with an Everfrost. There's no comparison. So Azir makes it in at number 6, guys. Now ahead of Azir, and if you like these videos, by the way, if you like the gist letting you know who the worst champions are, make sure to leave a like on the video. And coming in at number 5, starting off the top 5, is an AD carry, like Zarya, like Ezreal, who has to spend that much gold just to become kind of relevant, and this is a Felios. Now if you can play a Felios right, you can actually maybe carry in the early laning phase and in the laning phase in general. But here's the thing, guys. If you get ganked, if you miss position once, you're done for. It's over. When ahead, he is one of the most devastating AD carries in the game. But that's really for higher elo. Yes, in lower elo, you can still do a lot of damage as a Felios, but lower elo Felioses just aren't that well versed on the champion. So they're still going to miss position. That Darius with Stridebreaker, that Garen with Stridebreaker, that Annie with Rocket Belt, they are still going to blow you up in team fights. And as I said for Ezreal and Zarya, no one is going to peel you. And the only real peel you have is your Gravitum. So if you don't have this gun available, you're going to be in a world of trouble. So even though Felios got buffed in 11.8, like all his ultimate guns, even his lethality got buffed as well, and his items this season have actually been in a pretty decent spot as well, like Kraken Slayer is strong, Rune Mage Hurricane is better and cheaper. But the question remains, is it really worth to put time into a champion who is more killable than anything on the Rift? So beating a Felios, guys, to the number 4 spot, I'm not sure if you can call it beating, but here we go anyway, is a mage who, like Syndra, runs phase rush. And as a result, she's in a weaker spot, and this is Oriana. And yes, with the phase rush nerf, you are going to die more, unfortunately. Now, Oriana is similar to Syndra, in that in the early laning phase, you can get priority and you can actually pressure your opponent. But here's the thing, guys. You really have to know what you're doing on this champion to make her work in a solo queue environment. Your positioning has to be A1. You have to know the matchups inside out. You have to know how to control waves, because mages, in the mid lane, if you overextend and you get ganked, you're probably going to die. Now, that's even more apparent with the new phase rush. So again, like pretty much every champion on this list, yes, you might do damage with Ludens, you might do damage with your Seras if you go like Death Gab, which has been buffed this season. Yes, you do damage, but you are still very, very easy to kill. And we also have to keep in mind, guys, that in 11.8, Riot nerfed your E, so when that ball's on top of you, your armor, your magic resist isn't as strong as what it was. So yes, late game, you're pretty scary to verse, but that's every mage, but getting there, that's the issue. Now, as we get into the top 3 champions, guys, the worst champions of 11.10, it is the trademark last friendly reminder from the Jizz for you guys to check out the GameLeap website, because we have the best, the exclusive competitive challenger tier content, you need to climb out of elo hell and make the most out of this game this season. So join the club, links down below. Now coming in at number 3 is the last AD carry on this list. Thank God for that. Oh, and this champion, guys, well, he's actually different to a lot of the champions I've just talked about, because in the early game, he is one of the strongest in the game. And those of you who have played Lucian or play against a Lucian in lane will know this for sure. But the real downfall, the real disadvantage of Lucian in this meta, guys, is that he is short range. And every champion in the game is packing damage at the moment. And to deal that damage, you have to get up close and personal, which often means that you're putting yourself in the fire of 4 to 5 champions in team fights. So unless your positioning again is A1, so you're isolating just one champion and you can't get touched by any other, you are most likely going to die. You might trade 1 for 1, that's probably the best scenario for you. And guess what? You're not really that effective, and there are so many other champions out there who do the same job as you or a similar job, but just better. So even if you do win the early laning phase or the laning phase in general, you have to play close to perfect just to give yourself a chance of carrying and therefore winning. And like with Zarya, guys, the Essence Reaver nerfs hasn't really helped, so Lucian coming in at number 3. Now coming in at number 2, now I called this champion was going to be last patch actually, that he was going to be bad because of the nerfs he was getting, and guess what? The Jizz was right, and I even got flamed for saying this, but the truth is, guys, the Hecarim is terrible. And guess what's happening next patch? Well, I've already talked about it, but yes, Phase Rush is getting nerfed, and this is your keystone, so how can Hecarim not be worse? He's not getting buffed, his items aren't really getting buffed unless you want to go Riftmaker and Troll, I don't know. And the nerfs in 11.9, guys, have caused Hecarim's win rate, get this, to go down over 5%. 5%! He was one of, if not the best champion in the game a few patches ago, and now he's F tier. And as I said, with the Phase Rush nerf, this is going to get worse next patch, so Hecarim coming in at number 2, guys, the runner-up spot. So who's he runner-up to? Who can be worse than Hecarim if Hecarim's win rate is like 46, 47% now? Well, I'll tell you, this is a champion whose win rate is legit going to be 40%, I'm calling it. Now, I just talked about Phase Rush for Hecarim, I've talked about it for Oriana and Syndra as well. Well, this champion relies on Phase Rush as well to stay alive in the early game and to actually, continue trading with the enemy champions, because mobility is important. But like Lucian, guys, this champion is short range, so to actually really be effective, you have to get up close and personal with the enemy team. Most of the time, this is going to result in you dying unless you play it perfectly. And generally speaking, Rise, the Rune Mage, is the most killable champion in the game. Like, apart from the tats on your head, there is nothing scary about you. Even Oriana and Syndra outrange you, even other champions like Zed, Talon can kill you easily because of the Seeker's nerf, and because you're so squishy by default. And even though items like Frozen Heart look good on Rise and they've been buffed this season, Cosmic Drive looks good on him, none of these are that effective still. And even with Everfrost, which is in a good spot right now, yes, okay, it gives you a little bit more peel, but still, it's nowhere near enough to help you survive in a meta where damage, yes, is flying left, right, and center, and other champions with their mythic spike are just so much stronger. So Rise, because of the Phase Rush nerf as well, guys, comes in at number 1 for 11.10 for the worst champions. So those were the 11 champions, guys, of 11.10 who are going to be super bad, or probably bad. I mean, yes, you can still win on them, but I would recommend just waiting until right, hopefully, show them some love and put them in a better spot in the forthcoming patches. But as always, guys, thanks for watching. Remember to hit the sub button on the way out, and this has been the Jizz, and until tomorrow's upload.